Today we're going to be talking about factors of production. What factors of production are, some examples of them, and there's 4 different categories we're going to be looking at as well. One of the things that will help you out is we've also have a document uploaded to Canvas, which is called Key Terms or Vocabulary. There are some key terms that I want you to make sure you know. That's going to help you prepare for the unit test as well as the final. And then also at the bottom of that document are some places for you to provide some examples for a real life company. I'll get into that a little bit further, but I probably have that document handy as you're going through this video. It'll help you out and probably save you some time. Anyways, let's go ahead and get started. Our learning objective is we are going to talk about factors of production. You all will be able to share some responses to some questions with your peers when we get back to class, and you guys will discover and categorize some actual types of resources for a real life company. So let's get into it. When we talk about factors of production, what we're talking about is economic resources. And one of the key terms, one of the key concepts rather of economic resources is that term scarcity. What scarcity is a lack of resources. The idea of scarcity says that there's only so much to go around, that the world, society as a whole, we have unlimited wants and needs. We can never have enough. We'll always be in need and we'll always be in want of something. And there's just not enough resources in the world to supply those wants and needs. It's kind of a give and take, and we're going to talk about things like supply and demand here in a little while, and that's going to deal more with how that works and how that scarcity affects the economy. But I think it's important first to look at the different types of resources and be able to kind of categorize that before we get into supply and demand. So when you're talking about a business, though, scarcity can rear its head in different ways. Scarcity in cash is probably one of the biggest ones. When you're starting a business, it can be very expensive to start out, and if you haven't made any money yet, where are you going to get the money from? So that's one part of it that makes scarcity in business reflected as cash. Other things, raw materials and supplies. Things like demand. Your customers want your product. You want those customers to want your product. You want them to demand your product. Also, labor can be something that's scarce. You can't always find the right people to do the job, and sometimes you have to make some cuts or make some sacrifices. As I talked about, there are 4 factors of production. What factors of production are is it is all of the resources, all of the economic resources that's needed to produce a society's goods and to produce those society's services. The 4 factors of production are natural resources, labor resources, capital resources, and entrepreneurial resources. And we're going to go over those one at a time, starting with natural resources. Natural resources are raw materials from nature that manufacturers and goods producers use to make those goods or to be able to provide those services. They can be processed in a variety of ways. Some of the examples of different natural resources that we encounter, things like trees, oil, iron, those kind of things are natural resources. Things that come from the earth, things that are raw in nature. Natural resources split up into 2 different categories. There's renewable resources and non-renewable resources. Renewable resources are simply resources that you can reproduce. Once you use it, you can make more. So things like wheat, things like cattle, livestock, things like trees. Once you cut down that tree, you can plant another one and you'll have another tree later on. Non-renewable resources are limited. Once we use them, it is extremely difficult to make more, if it's possible at all. So things like coal, iron, and crude oil. Oil is a big, big factor for the world economy. Wars have started over oil because there's only so much. Our second type of factor of production is labor resources. Labor resources are people who make the goods or provide the services, and those people are in turn paid for it. So really, it's just people. It's the workers, it's the employees and the managers and the CEO and the boss. Labor resources might be skilled labor resources, things like welders. You have to be certified to be able to do that. Unskilled resources could just be, people mowing the yard. You don't necessarily have to be certified to mow a yard to still provide that labor. You can have intellectual labor resources. That would be things like doctors, lawyers. It's more of a mind over matter aspect there. And then obviously physical. And you can be in different categories. So you can be intellectual and skilled like a doctor, that you have to have that certification, those degrees to perform that intellectual labor. You can also be skilled and physical like the welder I mentioned earlier. Our third type of factor is capital resources. Capital resources are the things that you use to make the goods and services. So unlike natural resources, which that's the raw materials that becomes the goods or services, capital resources is like the equipment that you use to process that. It's like the chainsaw you use to cut down the tree. It's the truck that you use to haul the cattle. Those kind of things. It's the tractor that's used to harvest the wheat. Things like land is considered a capital resource. Things like the property or the plant, the building of a manufacturing plant would be considered it. This is an image of a hydraulic press, which is just a big piece of heavy equipment. That's considered a capital resource. It is not the good itself, but it helps make that finished good. And our third type of factor is the entrepreneurial resource. Can be a little bit of a tongue twister there. Entrepreneurial resource. Entrepreneurial resources really is a category that kind of covers all of the intangible assets of a business. And when I mean intangible, it's not stuff that you can really touch and feel. It's abstract. Things like a good idea. When a company invents something or comes up with a process to help things be produced more effectively or more efficiently, that idea, that concept, that invention is an intangible resource. It would be an entrepreneurial resource. Things like the education level, the knowledge that the company has, the degrees that the workers have, those are considered entrepreneurial resources. Also, when you copyright something, when you patent something, creative works, things you can't touch like that are considered entrepreneurial resources. And lastly, the entrepreneur himself or herself is considered the entrepreneurial resource. And here's how it all kind of ties together. Again, it's intangible assets, but those intangible assets allow us to either recognize a business opportunity and or take advantage of that business opportunity. The entrepreneur is the individual who spearheads the creation and the running of that business. So when we think about entrepreneurs, we think about the people who have started wonderful, glorious companies. People like Steve Jobs, who was a co-founder for Apple and really took that company to where it is today. Individuals like Bill Gates with Microsoft. One of my favorite individuals who's considered an entrepreneur is Elon Musk. Elon Musk is the CEO of Tesla Motors. That's the company that's made the electric luxury cars that have gotten real popular in the news the past couple years. But in addition to that, he is also the CEO of a company called SpaceX. And what SpaceX is, basically, it's a privately funded NASA. It's a privately funded corporation whose sole mission is to travel into space. And the government used to do that with NASA, but they don't really do that much anymore. And SpaceX's idea is to take people into space and explore at the cost of billions of dollars, I'm sure. Elon Musk even mentions that he plans to get to Mars, like regular flights to Mars by like 2024. Pretty unbelievable. But those three individuals would be considered entrepreneurs. Probably some of the more famous entrepreneurs. But entrepreneurs are also don't have to be big-time celebrity kind of folk either. The entrepreneur could simply be the individual who starts a lawn care business because he realizes that there's only a couple lawn care businesses in his little community. So he starts a new one. Or maybe it's the guy who invents something real simple like the Post-it note. The entrepreneur doesn't have to be a billionaire necessarily. One thing that's important about the entrepreneur is that not all of them are always successful. In fact, the entrepreneur has to take on those risks. They have to take the risk that we're going to try a space program as a business. And if it works, great. But if it doesn't work, the entrepreneur has to deal with that kind of failure as well. So that takes us through the 4 factors of production. Feel free to review the tape, the slides as well, and make sure you get those vocabulary pieces done. The next part of this assignment for you guys is I want you to look at one of the following businesses, and I've got these businesses listed on the document as well. Here they are on the slides: FedEx, Kroger, Mayfield's, Weigel's, Microsoft, Old Navy, 3 Minute Car Wash, and Aubrey's. And what I need you to do is determine one example, one actual real-life example for that business in each of the 4 factors of production. So if I was picking, if one of my companies I was going to pick was Kroger, I would need to determine a natural resource that they use. I'd need to determine what a labor resource, what an example of that would look like for Kroger. I'd need to think about what capital resources are for Kroger. And lastly, I might have to do some research and figure out what entrepreneurial resources Kroger has. One per factor, and just do it on one company, and there's a place on the document for you to provide a list for that. When we get back to class, be prepared to share those with other classmates, and we're going to do an activity around that as well. With that, thanks for watching. Have a good day.